Hello everyone, in today's hobby video I'm going to assemble and paint the classic Astra Militarum Chimera or Chimera. The first 5 minutes are a quick assembly guide, so if you want to scroll forward to the painting section, use a time bar below. So as far as assembly is concerned, it's actually quite a straightforward kit to build. I sped up the footage 3 times and will come in at certain points to explain any points of interest or tips to make your assembly easier. So first tip already is ensuring that you perfectly line up the bottom floor and front driver's compartment to the 2 track housings. I didn't perfectly do this to start, and it meant I couldn't get the front hole to perfectly marry up. It's pretty obvious, but make sure you do it to avoid frustration like I did. A really important point about the las gun array. I don't glue in place the tracks as you'll see later, instead painting them first. Given 2 of the las guns over the top of where the top track will go, you want to position the las guns at an angle that allow you to put the tracks in place later. I suggest at least a 35 to 45 degree angle. If you push them all the way down like I did, it will make it really hard to put in place a top track, as I discovered later. I can't stress this point enough. Notice I haven't glued in place the turret weapon, instead magnetising it. You can of course glue yours in place, however I've magnetised mine just to give me the future option for the other turret weapons. Now gluing the roof to the body, carefully apply your glue on the inside of any contact areas so it doesn't spill out onto the exterior of the model. Need to hold it in place for a while so the front section properly bonds and you don't have a massive gap between the front of the hull. So all done. Opted only for a couple of accessories, being a smoke grenade launcher and a quiller on the front of the model. I actually also add on a single bedroll on the back of the turret later. You can see of course that I haven't glued and placed the tracks, instead of painting them in the sprue as I find it much easier. So yep, onto the paint job. Right, so starting with the tracks, I firstly undercoat them in matte black by Army Painter or Abaddon Black by Citadel. And then when that's dry, I use Gunmetal by Army Painter, or of course you could use Lead Belcher. Then to wash the tracks, I then use a product by AK Interactive called Track Wash AK 083. You could also be using just simply Nuln oil by Games Workshop. Right, onto the body and turret of the weapon. I've sprayed it with the Mechanicus Standard Grey by Games Workshop in a spray can. And then I dry brush with Dawnstone. This catches all the edges, nuts, rivets, bolts, and gives the miniature some definition. It's quite subtle to start, but definitely does help. Then using MIG Productions Mud Splash Wash, I then pick out all of the detail using a finer point brush. This will start to give the Mini a dirtier look, as though dust and dirt has accumulated on the vehicle. Probably the longest part of the painting process, but vital for the final look of the miniature. The GW equivalent to this is Agrax Earthshade. So with the wash fully dry, then dry brush again with Dawnstone. This will push into the background, so to say, any parts where you're too aggressive with the MIG wash, and redefine any high points and make them pop. Now into the detail of the vehicle, using flat black, paint the lasgun array, turret and front sponson weapons, and also the detail on the rear troop ramp, being the two open handles and also the hydro pistons on either side of the door. When painting any of the detail, do your very best to not spill onto the Mechanicus Standard Grey which you've sprayed. I find vehicles always look the best when the original spray paint job is left untouched. If you do make a mistake, of course just tidy up using Mechanicus Standard Grey from a paint pot. Then repeat the same process with gunmetal, painting the las guns and main weapons. As you can see, I'll leave the muzzle of the las guns black and also the ball joint of the las gun array. As to the components on the rear troop ramp, I actually dry brush these areas and pick out parts of the handles with gunmetal. I think these components look better dry brushed silver rather than fully painted. Okay, now I assemble the tracks. As said before, if you didn't give yourself enough space with the lasgun array like I did, you need to force the top tracks in place. You can do this by snipping away the track components that protrude down on each of the track lengths. You'll then need to feed the tracks in from the front and apply your glue from underneath. As to the rest of the tracks, I suggest you remove them from the sprue and lay them out as per the instructions. This will make things much quicker and easier when you assemble the track links. Now onto some other finer detail, paint the aquillas and ribbons in Hashut copper, and the vision ports and lenses in Macragge blue. I've painted the single bedroll that I've attached to the back of the turret with Mournfang brown and rhino hide for the compression straps. All the detail painted, I then used Nuln oil on all of them, firstly on the silver metallics, the aquillas, and also very carefully on the lenses. Doing this on the lenses sharpens their edges and also pre-darkens the blue for later. Now to edge highlighting, I do all the silver on the lasguns and main weapons using gunmetal again, and make sure you do this consistently on the lasguns, highlighting all the muzzles and the various circle parts on the tops, sides and front of them. On the black of the weapons, use Dark Reaper to pick out the edges, ensuring hit the edges of the flash suppressor on the lasgun array. Do the same with the aquillas, again using Hashut copper, focusing on the top edges of the aquila and those on the skull's eyebrows and nose. Okay, now to the lenses. There are quite a few on this model, with all those on the troop compartment. Firstly, use Macragge blue and highlight the top left corner. You could do the top right if you wanted, but just make sure you're consistent and do it in the same corner across all the lenses. Now we use a lighter blue, being Alaitoc blue, and do the same thing, but this time we end the highlight a little shorter than what we did with Macragge blue. Then do the same thing again with Baharroth blue, ending the highlight even shorter than what we did with the Alaitoc blue. What we are doing is forming a gradual build-up of brighter colours to the top left corner. given we applied Nuln oil originally, the rest of the lens is quite dark. When you are doing this, you want to highlight to be a thin, sharp coat, so use your finest paintbrush for this process. Finally, using Corax white, we pick the final corner of the lens. You are dabbing a tiny amount, about as much as if you were painting a guardsman eye. It's a really small piece of paint. Right, so pausing that, it's looking really sharp now, with all the detail done. It does, however, look a bit too clean, as though it's just rolled off the manufacturing line in a Forge World. Let's now apply its transfers and start the weathering process. So the emblems I've chosen are actually from the Cadian Infantry kit, being the 317, which matches my wider army, and the House with Skull marking, which I'm saying represents transport units. I also apply a small number 2 on the troop ramp as well. Applying the transfers requires you to cut them out from the backing sheet and holding in water for 30 to 40 seconds. Don't soak any longer than that in case it comes free in the water and is destroyed. If one isn't initially coming off the backing paper, you better to soak for 40 seconds and try to remove, and soak again for 10 to 20 seconds and repeat until it comes free after being pushed through your paintbrush. Maneuver the transfers into place with your brush, having first applied Microsol by Microscale Industries. You don't need to use his products, but they will help make the transfers look more realistic and painted on. Once the transfers are dry, then use Microset, applying several times on the transfers. This will help the transfer to fully affix to the plastic. It heavily softens the transfers and makes them adhere more to the texture of the plastic. Definitely worth the extra effort. So next we give the flamers more of a sooty look by dry brushing with matte black and then with Balthasar gold. You could be quite aggressive here, making it look really dirty, but I apply a relatively small amount of dry brushing. Now for me, the funnest part of the painting process. Using some packing sponge, I apply some matte black to it, and then I dab away the majority of it onto my paper towelette. I then apply it to the miniature on areas I wish to represent where they've had a lot of wear and tear. For example, the front of the hull, front of the track housing, and edges of the troop ramp door. Don't forget the grab handles on the commander's hatch, and those likewise on the top of the troop compartment. I'm pretty aggressive at this point, as I want to make it look like it's fairly worn. I then conduct a similar exercise with gunmetal, but being way more precise. I dab it onto any areas which have been dabbed in black to represent where the paint has worn down to the metal. Lastly, I then use my finest tip brush to pick out exactly any areas I want to represent particular areas of wear. Okay, now a slightly more advanced part of the process to achieve weather streaking. This definitely isn't a must-have, but will give your miniature's paint job the appearance of aging, as though rain has caused grime and rust to run down the vertical surfaces of the armour. For this you'll need products by Anki Interactive, a fine point paintbrush, and ideally a flat rectangular tipped paintbrush. So first up I'm using Slimy Dark Grime AK026 and applying vertically down from any rivets, bolts or joins in the armour to represent where armour has pulled and dripped out. Do a section at a time, applying with your fine tip paintbrush. We then use another product, being Ordourless Thinner AK050 on our flat paintbrush, and remove any excess from the brush on a moist towelette. Now you wash this over the Slimy Dark Grime, pulling the paint stroke down. This spreads and dilutes the wash, making it look more realistic. To be honest, it's challenging getting it right at first, but as you go and practice, you'll soon work out how to make the streak look more or less concentrated. Then doing the same process with Streaking Grime AK012, applying over the top of areas already done before, but onto new areas which haven't been touched at all. And finally we use Rust Streaks AK013 and apply even more precisely, as for me this vehicle is relatively well maintained, and I don't want it to appear like a dirty rust bucket. Right, so there it is, all finished and ready to be loaded up with troops to be driven all over the battlefield. Hope your regret looks pretty mean with all the weathering and streaking done. If you completed this miniature using the same process, show off your work on Instagram. Make sure you tag me in the photo, as I'd love to see your work. So any questions, let me know in the comments, as I'm happy to help. If you enjoyed this tutorial and want to let me know, you can do so with a like, comment or by subscribing, or via a YouTube super thanks. However, even just watching the entire video really helps, as it means YouTube will suggest this video to other people as well. Feeling super generous, you can join my Patreon platoon. Patreon platoon, sound off. Lieutenant Mitchell, Colour Sergeant DuPont, Sergeants Brady, O'Dowd, Gilliam, Merrill, Veterans Gibson, Hall, Lundeen, Witten, Guardsman Combs, Glenn, Heels, Nitton, Nguyen, Tom, Tompkin.